I want you to take a second right now and just look around at your current reality. Notice the light hitting the objects around you, maybe the subtle shadows they cast.
Yeah, and just listen to the ambient sounds in the room right now. Maybe it's the hum of a refrigerator, distant traffic, or, just the sound of my voice.
Exactly. Pay attention to that feeling of gravity pulling you down into the chair you're sitting in. Notice the exact temperature of the air resting on your skin.
All of this feels incredibly solid, doesn't it? It feels like an undeniable, completely objective reality.
Right. But I want you to imagine, just for a moment, what your mind would actually do if someone suddenly reached out and pulled the plug on all of it. Like if the entire physical world was just switched off.
It goes against literally every intuition we have about how we experience the world. The natural assumption is that, well, if you remove the physical world, the mind just powers down.
Like it goes quiet.
Right, it goes to sleep. But we are jumping into a truly mind-bending deep dive today. We're looking at a Substack article by an author known as SpiralSeekr, and it's called Welcome to the Void, Sensory Deprivation Tanks and Ketamine.
And what this author lays out completely shatters that assumption about the brain going quiet. We are setting out today to explore this crazy intersection of biology, technology, and philosophy.
Yeah, we're decoding how physical sensory deprivation and chemical dissociation actually overlap. And it reveals that when the lights go out, the brain doesn't go to sleep at all.
It does something entirely unexpected. But to understand the sheer weirdness of what happens when you pull that plug, we first have to establish exactly what your brain is doing right now during normal waking life.
Which is a lot. SpiralSeekr points out that from an evolutionary standpoint, the human brain is a fiercely active prediction engine.
A prediction engine. That phrasing is really crucial, isn't it?
It is. I mean, we tend to think of our eyes and ears as these passive recording devices, right? Like little security cameras, just taking in the world and sending a live video feed to a monitor in the back of our heads.
Right. But biologically, that is not what's happening at all. Perception is active. It's not passive.
Exactly. To navigate the physical world, your cortex constantly demands this high bandwidth stream of external data. The author actually refers to these as algorithms.
Algorithms like what?
Like gravity, temperature, photonic data, which is just light and acoustic pressure, or sound.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this whole concept of the brain as a prediction engine is so foundational to everything else we're going to talk about.
Yeah, it really is the base layer.
Think about it like a navigation app on your smartphone, right? For that little blue dot to smoothly move along the map on your screen, the phone isn't just passively looking at the road.
Right, it's working hard behind the scenes.
Exactly. It's relentlessly pinging satellites in space. It's triangulating nearby Wi-Fi networks, checking cell towers. It needs all of those external algorithms to know exactly where it is in space.
And to predict where it needs to go next.
Right. Your brain is doing the exact same thing with light, sound, and gravity. It is constantly pinging the physical universe to keep your reality stable.
That is an incredibly helpful way to visualize it because it highlights the biological imperative here, the survival aspect.
Why does it need to predict so aggressively, though?
Well, because biological processing has a lag time. It actually takes milliseconds for light to hit your retina, travel up the optic nerve, and be processed by the visual cortex.
Wait, really? So we're always slightly delayed?
Yeah. If your brain only reacted to what had already happened, you'd live your entire life slightly in the past. You could never catch a thrown ball. You could never dodge a predator. So the brain uses this relentless stream of sensory data to actively predict the world millisecond by millisecond. It constructs a physical model of reality ahead of time so you can actually interact with it.
But wait, hold on. If I'm understanding this correctly, the brain is expending a massive amount of metabolic energy to run this continuous high-bandwidth simulation.
Oh, a huge amount of energy, yeah.
So what happens to this fiercely active prediction engine when the signal drops completely? Like when the navigation app can't find a single satellite.
And this is where the biology gets terrifying, but also incredibly fascinating. When these external parameters are deliberately severed, the prediction engine does not merely power down.
It doesn't just go to sleep.
No. Lacking an external anchor to map its predictions against, and this is a quote from the article, it begins to devour its own internal noise.
Devour its own internal noise. That is such a visceral, almost cannibalistic image.
It really is.
Instead of shutting off, it turns inward and just starts eating its own static. Which I guess brings us to the first deliberate method of severing that data stream, right? The physical isolation of a sensory deprivation tank.
Yes. SpiralSeekr describes a perfectly calibrated float tank as a marvel of physical biohacking. And when you actually look at the mechanics of what it does to the human nervous system, it really is.
It systematically starves the brain's data ingestion centers one by one. The article lays out exactly how this is achieved, and it's brilliant in its simplicity.
Right, starting with gravity.
Yeah, first you have the water, which is heavily saturated with hundreds of pounds of Epsom salts.
Which makes you incredibly buoyant. It effectively neutralizes the brain's gravitational input.
Right, you're floating effortlessly, so your muscles and joints literally stop sending signals about the weight of your own limbs pulling against the earth.
Then you have the temperature control, which is super critical. The saline suspension is maintained exactly at skin temperature, which is roughly 93.5 degrees Fahrenheit.
And biologically, what does that actually do?
Well, it extinguishes thermal contrast. Your nervous system relies on the contrast between its own heat and the ambient temperature of the air to know, where the body ends and the environment begins.
Oh, I see. So when the water matches your skin exactly, the thermoreceptors just stop firing.
Exactly. Without that differential, that physical boundary simply dissolves from your cognitive model. You lose the edge of your own body.
And finally, you close the lid. The tank is heavily soundproofed, blocking out all acoustic pressure from the outside world.
Utter silence.
And it is completely devoid of photons, pitch black. So you have zero light, zero sound, zero temperature differential, and effectively zero gravity.
And the result of this total starvation is what the author terms an acute topographical recalibration.
I'm going to need you to translate that because acute topographical recalibration sounds like something a geologist does after an earthquake.
Right, it's a bit dense.
What does that actually mean for the person floating in the dark?
It basically means the brain loses the map of its own physical territory. Topography refers to the physical arrangement of things.
Like a topographical map.
Exactly. Normally, your brain has a highly detailed, deeply ingrained map of where your arms are, where your torso is, where you are situated in a room. This is called proprioception.
Okay.
But in the tank, deprived of all external data and physical boundaries, the brain is suddenly flying completely blind.
Now, I have to push back here, or at least ask a question that I think you, the listener, might be wondering right now.
Sure.
I get that the brain wants data. But if I am floating in a dark, quiet, perfectly warm tank, why would the brain just take the night off?
Because it's dark and cozy.
Yeah. I mean, humans evolved to sleep in dark, quiet caves, right?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't it just conserve energy and go to sleep? Why go into this panic mode?
That's a great question, but there is a profound difference between the regulated state of sleep and the unnatural void of total sensory deprivation.
Oh, so?
When you sleep, your lower brain is still actively monitoring the environment for threats. You'll wake up if you hear a loud noise, right?
Yeah.
Or if you feel a sudden drop in temperature.
Oh, true. I definitely wake up if I'm cold.
Right. Your sensory organs are still sending data. The brain is just filtering it differently. But in a perfectly calibrated float tank, the data simply does not exist. The prediction engine is still wide awake, demanding its high bandwidth stream to maintain the physical model of reality, and it is receiving absolute zero.
So it isn't asleep.
Yeah.
It's fully conscious, but completely starved.
Yeah.
And because it's a prediction engine, it literally cannot stop predicting.
Exactly. And because it can't stop, it's forced to infer reality from whatever is left. It turns to its own neurochemical static.
The internal noise.
Yeah, the random microscopic firing of synapses, the subtle internal rhythms of the body, tiny electrical misfires in the visual cortex. This microscopic noise suddenly becomes the only data available.
And rather than just accepting the quiet, the brain spontaneously generates profound visual geometry. It creates complex auditory hallucinations.
It's wild.
It literally invents an entire structural universe out of nothing, just to prevent its cognitive framework from collapsing in the vacuum. Your brain would rather burn calories to hallucinate a universe than sit alone in the dark.
Because it is terrified of the void, so it fills it. And what's fascinating here is how universal this experience is. People emerging from these deep tank sessions frequently report seeing vast, shifting geometric architectures.
Whoa.
Or feeling as though their consciousness has expanded to fill an infinite dark space. The biological imperative to map reality is so powerful that when starved of the external universe, the brain effortlessly manufactures a synthetic one.
Okay, so we can starve the brain by physically hiding our biological sensors in a dark, salty tank. But what if you can't change the environment?
What do you mean?
Like, what if you are sitting in a brightly lit room with music playing? Can you shut off the prediction engine from the inside?
You can, and this is where SpiralSeekr introduces ketamine into the discussion. The article argues that the physical isolation of the float tank shares a startling physiological isomorphism with the mechanics of pharmacological dissociation.
Physiological isomorphism. Okay, that is a mouthful. Does that basically mean getting to the exact same destination, but taking a completely different road?
That is a perfect translation, yeah. Iso meaning equal or same, and morph meaning shape or structure.
Got it.
The structural outcome for the brain's mapping system is exactly the same, even though the method of getting there is completely different.
Right.
To understand how, we really have to look at how ketamine functions pharmacologically. It acts as a non-competitive antagonist at the NMDA receptor.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the mechanics of this are wild. Let's use an analogy to make the difference between these two methods crystal clear for you listening.
I love a good analogy.
Think of the NMDA receptors in your brain as toll booths on a massive superhighway. They are the primary pathways for transmitting excitatory sensory-related signals from your body deep into the cortex.
Okay, so the sensory data of the cars on the highway need to pass through these toll booths to reach the prediction engine?
Exactly. And under normal circumstances, a neurotransmitter called glutamate acts as the ticket. It opens the toll booth, allowing the sensory traffic to flow freely into the processing centers.
Right.
So if the sensory deprivation tank is like closing down the highway completely so no cars are even driving on it, meaning you physically block the environment from reaching the body, then ketamine is entirely different.
But doesn't block the environment.
No. Ketamine is like taking a massive semi-truck and parking it horizontally directly across every single toll booth. It is a non-competitive antagonist, meaning it doesn't fight for a ticket, it just structurally blocks the gate.
The physical barrier.
The cars are still on the highway. The light is still hitting your retina. The sound waves are still vibrating your eardrum. But the traffic physically cannot pass into the brain's processing centers.
That is precisely how it works. You have disabled the biological hardware itself. You've chemically severed the transmission lines.
It's like sneaking into the brain's control room and physically cutting the wires to the monitors.
Yes, and this brings us to a critical downstream effect of both methods. Whether you use the physical isolation of the tank or the chemical blockade of ketamine, both initiate a profound decoupling.
A decoupling of what?
It severely impacts a specific architecture in the brain known as the default mode network, or the DMN.
Ah, the default mode network. We are hearing about this more and more in neuroscience lately. This is essentially the seat of the ego, isn't it? It's the part of the brain that maintains the ongoing autobiographical story of you.
Yes. If you are sitting quietly and daydreaming or ruminating on an argument you had yesterday or worrying about a meeting tomorrow, that is your default mode network highly engaged.
Right, it's all about me.
It is heavily involved in self-referential thought and autobiography. But crucially, it relies heavily on spatial mapping to maintain the boundaries of the self in relation to the external world.
Oh, I see where this is going.
It needs to know where your physical body ends in order to know where the rest of the universe begins.
So if we connect this back to what we just learned about the tank and the toll booths, when the host consciousness is systematically unmoored from the biological hardware responsible for physical mapping, the DMN completely loses its foundational data.
It has no reference points.
It's trying to write the story of you, but it suddenly has no idea where you are physically located.
And as a result, the DMN dramatically downregulates. Its activity just drops off a cliff. And the subjective experience of this downregulation is profound.
What does it feel like?
Well, as SpiralSeekr beautifully puts it in the article, stripped of the physical boundary of the body, the ego structure disperses into the void.
I am genuinely struggling to wrap my head around the sheer weight of that concept. You lose the physical map of your limbs and your skin, so you literally lose the psychological concept of I.
Yeah, the boundary of the ego dissolves simply because the brain can't find its physical borders. The physiological isomorphism is complete.
Wow. Whether by Epsom salts in the dark or by a molecular roadblock at the NMDA receptor, the mind is unmoored and the ego vanishes.
Which brings us to the final and arguably most challenging section of SpiralSeekr's exploration.
Okay, lay it on us.
Now that we understand exactly how this happens mechanically, we have to look at the epistemology of the void. We have to grapple with the philosophical implications of this isolated, generative consciousness.
Okay, epistemology. Let's make sure we ground that term for the listener. Epistemology is the branch of philosophy concerned with knowledge, right? It asks, how do we know what we know? How do we determine what is real and what is an illusion?
Exactly. And the phenomenon we've been discussing throws a massive wrench into our everyday epistemology.
Because, as we've established, the moment empirical physical reality powers down, the brain effortlessly hallucinates its own alternate geometric realities to map against the darkness.
And it takes no effort. It is an automatic, involuntary reflex of the prediction engine.
So what does this all mean? If human consciousness requires absolutely zero effort to spontaneously synthesize complex structural universes out of literal static, how stable is the fundamental illusion we call waking life?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it really is the ultimate confronting question. We all walk around assuming that our waking life is a direct, transparent window into an objective reality.
You just assume you're seeing the room exactly as it is.
Right. But if the exact same biological hardware that renders your living room can, a moment later in a float tank, project an entirely different universe completely out of internal noise, it forces us to question the solidity of the living room itself.
Because both the living room and the geometric void are being generated by the exact same processor. It makes everyday reality feel incredibly fragile.
Yeah.
It makes you realize that your experience of sitting in your chair right now listening to us is not a passive recording.
Not at all.
It is just a highly successful, biologically agreed upon hallucination that happens to be tethered to external data.
SpiralSeekr brings the article to a grand finale by synthesizing this into a core dichotomy that we really have to pose to ourselves.
What's the dichotomy?
Well, when you strip away gravity, when you remove photons and acoustic pressure, and when you chemically block the transmission bridges of your own nervous system, and all that remains is complex, shifting structural geometry, what are you actually looking at?
Right.
Are you simply witnessing the brain hallucinate the void?
Meaning, is it just a biological glitch, like a neurological screensaver that pops up just to keep the prediction engine busy until the data comes back online?
Or have you simply uninstalled the sensory operating system to gaze directly at the underlying mechanics of existence?
Wow. Have you uninstalled the sensory operating system to gaze directly at the underlying mechanics? That is incredibly heavy.
It shifts your whole perspective.
It suggests that maybe the shifting geometry in the void isn't the hallucination. Maybe the void is the actual base layer of reality, the raw code of the universe, and our everyday world of gravity, light, and temperature is just a highly specialized user interface built on top of it so we can survive and reproduce.
It perfectly bridges the gap between hard neurobiology and deep metaphysical philosophy. The physical isolation and the chemical blockade are just two different ways of hacking the exact same interface.
They really are. And I think this brings the entire journey right back down to earth for you listening to this right now.
Yeah, it's highly applicable.
Understanding the mechanics of a sensory deprivation tank or an NMDA receptor doesn't just teach us abstract trivia about biohacking or pharmacology. It shows us just how fiercely active, intensely fragile, and beautifully constructed our everyday experience of reality truly is.
It's a relentless, miraculous engine of creation, and we entirely take it for granted until we switch it off.
Your mind is working tirelessly, burning calories every single millisecond to build the world you are sitting in right now.
It is.
But I want to leave you with a brand new, lingering question to mull over today. Something that builds logically right out of SpiralSeekr's premise.
Let's hear it.
We have just spent all this time establishing that if the brain's prediction engine naturally and effortlessly synthesizes vast universes when it is completely starved of external data, what exactly is happening to our cognitive framework right now in a modern digital world where it's chronically bombarded with too much sensory data?
Oh, that is such an important question about the environment we've built for ourselves. Because our brains evolved to process the gentle analog algorithms of nature, right? Sunlight, wind, gravity.
Exactly. So if sensory starvation forces the brain to dream up a universe to survive, does sensory overload obscure that underlying reality completely?
That makes total sense. If we're constantly drowning the engine in endless notifications, artificial blue light, and a never-ending feed of digital information,
does our internal reality engine eventually lose the ability to dream altogether? Like, if someone pulled the plug on your reality today, would your brain still know how to light up the void?
it is a profound vulnerability to consider. Are we overriding our own biological capacity to generate meaning from the quiet?
It is definitely something to think about the next time you reach for your phone in a quiet room. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Look around one more time at the light, the sound, the feeling of the gravity holding you in your chair. It might look undeniable and rock solid, but remember, it only takes a moment in the dark or a single roadblock at the toll booth to see what is really running beneath the surface. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.